All right, I'm here with Michael Mulyar, and Michael is a very prominent chess coach. I think he has somewhere around 15 schools in Denver. And I'm kind of curious, I never actually asked you, how did you get started with that? How did you get the idea?
I started way back in about 2008. First, I worked with a company called Silver Knights Chess.
Oh, right.
And then I started my own company, 2008, and I've been working ever since. I have several coaches working for me as well. It's really a fun profession because you get to do what you want.
Yeah.
And you also get to play chess.
Yeah, chess is. It's really, it's also really fun when you see kids having fun. I think most of us can remember working jobs where you see people really, disgruntled, and you're playing chess, and all the kids are having fun and laughing, and you're watching players get better, and you sometimes travel and go places. Yeah. And what do you think has been kind of like a core component of what's been successful for you?
Well, it's always been trying to focus the attention on how players can actually play on their own, what they can do for themselves, as opposed to me teaching them the game. It's useful for me to share my experience, but kids like to generally just play on their own and discover the chess game for themselves. And many start at absolute beginner, and then we'll get to 2200 over at some point of time. So they just need to discover the chess game for themselves, and their own style and their own perspective of the chess game. That's usually been my philosophy of teaching.
And I think you were saying that a big thing for them to learn is that oftentimes the game is not over, right away. Like a lot of people go, "Oh, I'm winning in the opening," but the game still keeps going.
Right.
And then it'll be move 20, and both sides just have to keep making good moves and keep gradually improving their position. Yeah, I think that's a big thing, that you'll see games where there'll be wild swings, and so keeping your composure is probably quite a hard thing for a lot of kids when they're playing. They're just maybe not used to. It can be very shocking when you go from winning to losing to winning to losing, and you have to take a deep breath and just go, okay, you need to focus on the position and keep playing good moves.
One thing I realized when I started teaching chess is that every generation has its own sort of things that it studies and its own things that it wants to play. So when I was starting playing chess in the 1980s, almost everybody knew you started with e4, e5, and you played the Italian game with Ruy Lopez or something.
Right.
And nowadays what you see is openings like the reverse bank, go knight f3, d5, c4, d4, b4.
Yeah.
Or you see players playing openings that are not really very well known. I mean, what about a kid who wants to play at the very beginning g4, or or more familiar, of course, would be something like b3. But you enter a room where kids start playing something like the first move is almost always a b4 or an a4 or a g4, and over time they discover, okay, that's a strategy too, I guess.
Yeah.
But they have to know a little bit also about mainline openings.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a very important lesson one grandmaster taught me. He said you can't run away from classical positions forever. And when he first told me that, I was so confused. I was thinking, did he just tell me a riddle? What is he telling me? I'm not quite sure I understand. But later I understood. He meant that there are whole classes of positions that they're just important to see, like Queen's Gambit Decline type positions, Ruy Lopez type positions, Nimzo type positions. And I was trying to basically play strange pawn structures, and he was trying to say in a nice way, maybe it's time to let go of those weird positions and play quote unquote real chess. And
mainline e4, e5, which is your opening the Kislik Ruy Lopez.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a funny story. Yeah, I mean, I actually talked with Spidler about that, and he said something like, oh well, I didn't, I just thought that you wanted the name for namesake and for recognition. I said, it's not really important to me. I just thought it made sense, and a bunch of my students thought it would be a good idea. And he's like, oh okay, and he said, oh yeah, I read the article. Okay, yeah, no, and then he did some kind of broadcast, and he called it the Kislik variation. I just thought it was a funny ending to the story. But yeah, I think for me with a lot of things, a lot of chess was about experimenting, was just trying different things, kind of finding my own identity. I know that sounds a little cliche, but in chess, yeah, I mean, you just find things you like and you find things you don't like, and sometimes you'll notice. I mean, so I played. I mean, just to give an illustration, I played some weird stuff in the Rai Lopez. I mean, I played this line.
Oh, wow,
I
yes.
played the Norwegian, and I lost to this guy. I forget his name. It was about 2450 or so. He just really, crushed me in this line. But I got away with playing this a bunch of times, and I mentioned this briefly in one of the chapters in my book. I just said, was talking about how, well, even though you can win the bishop pair in a lot of lines, you're spending a lot of time. And I don't know. Let me see if there are some scores here. Yeah, white scores about 66%. But yeah,
This opening.
yeah, there were people who played f6, really, really passive. I mean, I think Seaman Agdestein played this. I think he was connected to why they call it the Norwegian. But yeah, it's I was playing this line with bishop to b7, and I believe there was a Leiko game with bishop to d2. I think both of those moves are pretty dangerous moves, pretty awkward moves to play against. But yeah, I mean, kind of the genesis of the lines that I played in the Rai Lopez was all about just kind of fooling around, trying almost everything possible. And I had a game once with Richard Rapport, and he played a really interesting line in the main line against me. He went here, knight take, knight c6, knight to b3, a5, bishop e3, a4, and I remember how interesting I found it. He played the move rook fc8 against me, and I had never really looked at it before. And he later on, a couple of moves later, he played a move. He went, I moved my knight over, and he went g6, and then he went knight to e8. And I remember when he played this knight e8 move against me, I just thought, wow, I would have never thought about that. But looking back on it, I'm thinking, well, you know what? The d5 square isn't really something that I can exploit with a knight. So maybe he can get away with that. And it was something that I thought was just really strange. But then I started looking at some other variations, and I started to think, actually, that's quite a deep and subtle idea. And there are lines where that might work, where queen b7, bishop d8, bishop b6 might work. And then I started looking at this line more, and I started to go, this is really interesting. This isn't the line, of course, that's called the Kislik variation, but it's just one of the lines that I experimented with. And that's, I mean, so when people talk about playing multiple different lines, like 2 or 3 different openings, one of the great things about playing something rich like the Nimzo Indian or the Rai Lopez is that you have so many different lines like this that you can play. And that was one of the nice things for me with experimenting. What about you in terms of your opening philosophy, let's say, with black in the Rai Lopez or these types of lines? I mean, in your case, was it mostly about just kind of finding something you liked the most, or how did you make a choice?
For years, I've been an admirer of things like c4, the English, and generally I've played e5 with black, but it is never. I've never had a solid one-line repertoire, so I've always tried with various lines with like c4, e5, g3 maybe. I often played in my earlier days knight c6, bishop g2, g6, knight c3, bishop g7.
And against e4, were you playing other lines too? Were you playing the French at all, or?
E4, my main opening has always been e5. Occasionally I'll play the Alekhine.
But, right, yeah, no, I think Vasek said he played you in the Alekhine 25 years ago.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
But my main question, just the other tournament at the Washington International, I played c4, e5, knight c3, knight c6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, e4, knight e7, knight d2, d6, d3, castles, a position I've played for roughly now maybe 20 years.
Wow.
But I realized, okay, bishop e6, knight,
Just go back.
just go back.
Yeah.
Bishop e6,
so bishop e6,
knight d5, queen d7, bishop e3, f5, queen d2, Here, this position is kind of fresh. Every time you play, you have to play something else. So I thought, okay, well, what is the move here? Well, Botvinnik, or the old style grandmasters played rook a to e8,
okay.
and then they played knight c8 and knight d8. But here's what this maneuvering got me. I played rook to a to e8, f3, knight c8, takes d4, and White was just doing outstanding here.
It was a favorable transformation.
Or actually,
of the
yeah,
position.
it's a favorable transformation. So, or actually, I took with the bishop. But okay, what is the best strategy here in this position? Well, it's to vary dynamically. So the stockfish plays like rook f7,
right.
and ask what White does. If White plays
so f3,
then you go
a8.
rook knight d4. Knight
Uh-huh.
d4 even is available immediately with an
Ah.
exchange sacrifice. Knight d4, knight d4.
Oh, sorry. Let me just click this. Yeah.
Knight takes d4, e takes d4, bishop g5, and here you play f takes e4.
Wow.
Because after knight e7, rook e7.
You have the intermediate move.
Intermediate move.
Oh, wow.
So this seems to equalize with f takes
Take,
e4,
and
e3 equalizes. But the point is, if you go back through this, you have to vary your options. Occasionally, White does not play f3. If he does play f3, then Black invades on d4. Well, what if he doesn't? What if he plays rook a b1? What do you do in that case? You go rook a to f8, threatening f4. You try to coerce him into playing f3, and then you jump on the d4 square. But that's something you learn every time.
Yeah.
At rook a b1, I think f4 is a move, in fact, in this position, if it not rook a to f8. But generally, these are, every time you play a chess game, you enter some sort of a new
world.
Yeah. B4, f4, yes.
Yeah,
in this
F4,
position,
wow.
f4 is the move, and
Wow.
knight d4, yes, is the theory, and it's completely different from what you've been taught 30 years ago.
Yeah. So what would you say you were taught a long time ago?
Just step-by-step processes which eventually will lead to you equalizing the game, and that's not really correct.
Right.
The correct answer is absolutely strategy-like ideas which have to be very deeply calculated, and which are going to work or not work in a position. You have to know what you're doing at move 15. You can't just play your old-style moves like knight c8, knight d8,
because a
c6.
lot of the time there would be kind of stereotyped moves people would play, and you could get away with a lot of things, but now it's kind of more like, you ask the more concrete questions. What are you really doing here? What am I really threatening?
You have to know this kind of theory here, that
right.
rook c1 or f3, rook b1 is a deeply theoretical position. I believe rook f7 is the only move, for instance, that equalizes.
Right.
While rook e8 just isn't going to do it. There's no counter plan, anything that Black would be able to do to salvage this time enough for knights.
Right.
But that's what I've learned over the years, is that chess requires precise and firm solutions, and very precise middle game solutions, where the opposite approach, you just maneuver, is not usually a good one.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the very few criticisms of Karpov's play, is that sometimes he actually over-maneuvered rather than playing a pawn break directly in some of his matches against
Be more
Kasparov.
direct at these sorts of things.
Whereas maybe like a Mamedyarov or a Caruana might have been more direct with some of the pawn breaks.
If you play, for instance, rook f7, rook b1, would you go for this? F4
Oh wow.
takes. Would you go for? Let's see.
We say knight d4. Or?
Yeah, knight d4 takes and takes. Would you go for this kind of a pawn sacrifice or pawn break, or occasionally if it involves an exchange sack somewhere along the lines? If I can remember right, the line here with f3, knight d4 is available, but rook a to b1. Almost certainly this sort of thing is available. Takes,
Oh wow.
takes, bishop c5 will necessitate an exchange sack of some sort. Probably with knight d4. Well, maybe not in this position. I'd have to recollect my theory here, but rook f7 is the most precise move in the position.
Yeah, no, I mean, it again ties into the whole, improving the worst place piece. but where exactly do we want the pieces? Do
Yeah.
we want them on the F file? And if we put it on the E file, what exactly are we going to use it for when we put it there?
Yeah.
So it's a more concrete, deeper way of asking. where do you wanna
Concrete,
go.
deeper questions have to be answered if you want to play chess nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there were a lot of there were a lot of lines in the past that maybe like the Botvinnik Semislav, like you have played, which certain lines people would have just assumed were winning for one side, and now
Yes.
people insist on actually going, okay, well, actually prove that. So let's actually see why that's winning, because if it's not a win, then maybe I can just play it. And there are sidelines of the Botvinnik Semislav that when I looked at them, they were lines that were just out of operation for 10 years, 15 years. Nobody played them. And I just took maybe I'd face it in a blitz game, or I'd, just analyze it out of the blue, and suddenly you take a look and you go, wait, actually this is
But every
maybe not so-
time I play this with white, okay, so in the Botvinnik Semislav, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, bishop g5.
Yeah.
If you do go into the theory here, you have to be well prepared with white for various tries,
Right.
such as, okay, knight d7, g3. Well, what about queen a5? This kind of a thing you have to know this at least.
Huh.
Although it's not particularly dangerous to black, so e takes f6, b4,
94.
knight
I
e4,
saw that.
bishop to a6. What is the best move? Well, in
wow.
practice, I think that the move, something like queen c2 will do fine.
Okay.
Um,
I was thinking about just queen f3, but yeah.
Queen f3 may also do fine.
Yeah, huge score in correspondence.
Huge score correspondence, but is queen f3 a move?
Queen f3 is a move. Yeah.
It's queen c2 rather. Is,
Oh,
is
I
that a
don't
move?
see queen c2 played here. No.
Or wait, b3 maybe is a move.
B3 is a move. Yeah, B3 is. A move.
b3, black has no real way to make any progress, just closing the queen side. Knight
Right.
b6, queen c2.
Yeah, I mean you have to be careful. You have to be careful about these little sidelines, and I think it's important to at least check most of these sidelines just once at least. I mean, in my case, it's one of those things where people might say, oh, you just try to remember the line, but my approach is, well, I would rather kind of try to explain the line to myself.
Yes.
Why is this fundamentally a problem? Because then if you're sitting at the board, I'm probably more likely to remember why they have to play the main line rather than something else. For example, if you conclude something like, well, if they don't play, for example, like in a French defense line, you might conclude something like, well, they have to play f6 or c5 or some kind of pawn break where they don't have enough play against the center. And something little like that kind of can save me a lot of energy in terms of not having to remember some theory, for instance.
Yes.
But yeah, in this case, definitely the fact that you realize, all right, I have the e4 square, my bishop on g5 isn't a tactical problem, I defend everything. Yeah, I mean, I also think that I think another example of a line which can be underrated is this bishop e7 line.
Yes, of course.
I haven't really looked at this that closely recently, but you can see if you look over, look in the database.
Bishop
look
b3 isn't going to make an impact, so you have to know bishop f6.
Yeah, exactly. Take g3, and the lines there can run pretty deep, and
Deep, yes.
yeah, somebody tried bishop knight takes b5 against me, but I don't think it's very good.
Yeah.
I think they play this week a knight b4. That's
Knight
a very
b4
very
is a
nice
trick
trick.
here.
It's a very nice trick. And castle, I just go rook d8. I thought this was good to play with black. That's like the ideal trap. In terms of opening traps that we often talk about, that's a very deep one, of
Or
course.
a4 doesn't particularly lead to advantage because of queenside castle.
Yes, exactly.
Takes, knight b5, knight b4.
Knight b4, right. I was thinking about e5 as well. Yeah.
This doesn't win outright, at least in white.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, these lines are all really, really interesting.
But I think
94
knight e4 is the main line, and of course here a4. has
Yeah,
to play
very heavy, deep lines here. But
theory.
again, yeah, I mean, what is your philosophy on because on the one hand, it makes sense to think, well, if I play deep theory with white, I'm putting the burden of proof on my opponent to really prove that they can play 20, 25 moves in the exact direction that I want to take them in. But what about when you're looking at it from the black side? Is it the same? Is it the same thinking that they might not know it as well as me, or what would you say is the rationale?
Well, my philosophy with it is that with white, I try to force the opponent into some sort of theory if I could.
Right.
But with black, I think I would be happy if I'm sort of familiar with the opening. And I can play it. I don't think the theory is going to be always drawn, for instance, or always won. It just has to be played out, and you would have to know what you can do over the board in a particular circumstance in which you're playing the game.
Right.
So the game always settles somehow whenever I play it. You can never get 25 moves of draw and prepared opening repertoire with black.
Yeah, right.
So if you can be somewhat settled in a position and just try to make your best moves and try to do your best with black, that's usually what I try to
So it's a very practical approach. So it's kind of like, familiarity with the main lines, familiarity with the main types of ideas, maybe looking over some of the games where black won, some games in a variation, get some ideas of how you might win. Maybe even, test out some lines against the engine, see how it beats you in certain lines.
Correct.
Specifically when you have lines which are really, really awkward. I think that's a good approach, because that way you don't over focus on being theoretical. You more focus on being practical.
Yeah, it's useless, like you're saying, to prepare deep theory just to play it over the board. It won't happen. Something will be played and you won't know the particular theory that's going on.
I think a lot of the time what happens is that you just get surprised with something. The position is, like you said, approximately equal, and both sides, it's just a long game. Both sides are playing moves, and you have to understand the position, and that's a really important thing, and why when I'm discussing openings with players, I have a bunch of questions. One of the questions is, well, who do the equal positions favor?
Correct.
And sometimes we've definitely looked over some positions where you'll see positions that are equal in theory, or quote unquote equal in theory, but when you really look at them, white's having all the fun, and you'll also see cases where black's having all the fun, and those are kind of ways of looking at the opening that I think haven't really been done. It's not really such a common approach, but it's how practical players often think about it. And so, and that kind of goes back to the whole thing we were talking about, where you find openings that you like playing and you enjoy playing. And there can be cases where I think what I did with some of my Rai Lopez lines is that I played some lines that might have been objectively a little bit dubious, but I just liked them. And because I liked them, I was able to play them pretty confidently. So even when I played, the Norwegian variation or the Kislik variation, which I believe is a little dubious, but that's not the important part. I just thought it was a fun position to play, and I played some lines which were probably even bordering on outright losing in the Rai Lopez, but maybe I didn't. I kind of thought, well, this might spice up the game, and I don't know exactly what they're going to do. They definitely have room to go wrong, and if I thought I could go wrong in their shoes, then I would play something like that. So that's, but I do also have the philosophy that when I'm playing with white, I like to go for the maximum. Do you have the same approach?
My approach with white is try, at least if you're going to play an opening like d4 or c4, knight f3, I rarely play e4 these days, is to try to, as much as possible, force the issue, try to put the burden of proof on your opponent that they're still going to be able to equalize out of the opening, but it's not going to be very easy for them. And very often, the burden of proof does, I think, rest with the black pieces. So I think over time, people do realize how much strength there is to a well-prepared opponent playing white.
Playing white, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that kind of underlies the whole philosophy of playing for two results, which many players play. Many Hungarian players, many players of a lot of different countries, Russian players, Soviet, ex-Soviet grandmasters would play in this very kind of stodgy, solid, but pressuring. I call it like active positional is how I would describe it. It's kind of like a Karpovian style where maybe with black they'd be content to play solidly, but with white they'll just kind of mainly try to put the pressure on you and aim for a lot of positions where you have one or two weaknesses and they don't have any.
Yeah.
So they're just basically free rolling through the opening. And there are a lot of cases like that. I mean, you'll see cases like that in the Catalan and the G3 Kings Indian, and that's part of the reason why I see those as being very, very valuable from a white point of view. And that's also why I tried to mimic certain players like Michael Adams and Spidler a little bit when I was initially trying to play with white. I was just kind of following their ideas because I liked the way they played positionally, and I liked the way that I felt like they weren't taking a lot of risks. I also saw that a little bit from players like Movsesian, just that he played an interesting white repertoire with e4, and not that many players, at least I felt, were playing e4 in a very positional way.
Yeah.
So I picked that up from Adams, Spidler, Movsesian, Wróblewski, players like that, where you could play in a kind of unconventional way, but you'd also be playing for two results for the most part. And do you find that, just kind of going back to one of the things we were talking about before, do you find that when you're coaching kids that one of the most important things is to motivate them with study material or with how to analyze their games, or what would you say is the thing you focus on?
Game analysis and sort of complex learning is what I emphasize. They have to learn these things and have to become a little bit more prepared in the things that they play, in the lines that they play, in their repertoire, as opposed to overall. I mean, there's no sort of overall, okay, so there's going to be an overall equalization in the Scotch. What is the idea of that? So I don't teach them that if they play the Scotch, then they have to learn how to play it with, let's say, the white pieces with the black pieces. Or if they play the Italian, they have to learn how to play it generally.
Right.
But you have to become a good player with the white pieces, whether you play any kind of openings. You have to play it well and competently. And with black, a little bit familiar, I guess. And I agree with you that the game does revolve mostly around the two outcomes.
Right.
So
right.
I think that is correct. So the emphasis in my coaching is try to get players to expand their view of the subject. I mean, one of my students plays the Sveshnikov, so I tell him every time, study it a little bit more deeply.
Right.
Keep studying it until you've discovered the ins and outs of the opening, which are not going to be necessarily, that there's one line or 3 lines or 5 lines, but more like 20 lines or 30 lines.
Right.
That you have to know how to play and be able to become a stronger player over the board.
Yeah, no, I mean, and when you're playing the Sveshnikov, you'll go, all right, well, I also have to learn how to play lines. I'll also have to play lines like knight to d5.
Knight to d5 has to be
you
studied.
look up, you see some Nakamura games, and you go, okay, I actually have to know how to play these lines.
Yes.
And it was one of those things where when I played the Sveshnikov, I did pretty well in the main lines, but I dropped a game to this knight d5 line. I dropped some games in the Rossolimo. I was mostly getting Rossolimos after that. So you definitely have to learn the ins and outs of all the lines. And I think trying to develop a whole understanding of the pawn structure and what kind of plans you want to play really adds a lot of value to that. And I tried to eventually build up kind of, in at least the Rossolimo, how I wanted to play those kind of structures. And even if your idea is a little bit offbeat, if you have a clear plan, it counts for something. Because if you have that plan, then maybe the next 4 or 5 moves might be natural moves after that. So yeah, I think a lot of the time people will say things like, well, the focus on coaching, especially young players, is on having fun. But I think that to be more specific about that, what I would say is that I like to emphasize the idea that learning is fun. For me, it's always been I've always been a very curious player, so I like it when students are really curious about everything. And I think that really helped me a lot, is that I always, it's like I would be so curious. Like, here's an example of typical curiosity. You look at a line like this, and I go, all right, well, I want to see what exactly is the main line. I don't even remember what it is. And you just play out a bunch of moves. You play out a main line, and then eventually you draw some kind of conclusion on it.
Right.
And I like to just kind of get a general feeling in a lot of different lines. Actually, white scores This is below 30%. I mean, below
Black is doing
40%.
fine.
Black's doing extremely well in this exact line here. So maybe this isn't the best illustration of. That's a very good pawn sacrifice,
Good
by
pawn
the way.
sacrifice.
Classic pawn sacrifice with e4, and it's very. It very much seems like it would be played in Zurich 53. It's very classic. And white might need to do something desperate, like I don't know, c5 or something. But yeah, black has a great score. But little things like this are very valuable. You see some of the typical classic sacrifices, and you go, okay, I can play them myself. And a lot of the time, like I said, the moves are not outside of our reach. We just need to put it in our view, and then if it's in our view and we've become acquainted with certain types of ideas, we're much more likely to find them.
Or once you start analyzing the mainline theory, like Anand Grishuk in the Sveshnikov 2015, you start seeing Grishuk obviously drew the game and had some had some important innovations. But again, to us as sort of experienced players, it appears almost always that you'll be able to equalize the game. But to a player starting out, that's not always the case.
No, it doesn't. It
doesn't always feel that way.
It just feels very confusing. So a lot of the time, at least that's how it felt to me. So a lot of the time, you have to focus on just understanding what am I trying to do. What are some core things about the position I can understand? Are there any things I need to be really careful about and really watch out for? And if you can sidestep all the biggest problems, and most of the time, like we're saying, just get a good game with black, get a good playable position. That counts for a lot, and as long as you're succeeding in doing that, I think that's a very good start.
So if you're going to argue at least the two outcomes, you have to at least argue these in two different variations. I mean, there's the draw and win, but there's also the two outcomes unknown theory.
Right, you're right.
In two outcomes, you can also have unknown theory kind of discussions
Sure.
where you're within theory and you're playing okay kind of within theory, or you're just a little bit not inside the classical theory and you're doing something not right, not okay, and that's also
no.
okay.
I mean, and that happens. That happens all the time. I think
we're not always 100% within theory.
Yeah, sure. And I think when that happens, the main thing for me is just to try to understand, well, why was what I did so bad?
Right.
I mean, really.
Or maybe it was still playable and you just have to do your best with it.
Yeah, you just have to do your best with it. Yeah, I mean that's one of my sayings. Don't despair. Look for compensation. You might have some positional weaknesses. All right, well, try to find some compensation. Try to find some weaknesses in your opponent's camp, or try to create them, or try to find some tactical vulnerabilities, or try to find some way. We might be able to sacrifice the exchange. It's like. I remember certain times, I mean, this happened more when I was around 2000, but sometimes my opponents would be very shocked when I would sacrifice the exchange, just how free I was willing to do that. And I would often do it in positions where they had a big positional advantage. And it would kind of be just to kind of spice up the game, kind of change the trend of the game. But that's important. I think specifically for players, 1600, 1700, that can really...
the sort of player I coach.
Yeah. That just the kind of idea that when the static trend isn't going in your favor, you aim for something dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think when players kind of become more open-minded about material, they definitely are much more dangerous with sacrifices and even with finding moves that could be hard for IMs and GMs to find. Just being really willing to give up a pawn, give up the exchange, give up a piece. And I think the core thing there is just to understand where the compensation comes from. And when you build up over time a better and better understanding of compensation, kind of like in cases like this one, like with Bishop.
Black has a great position.
Yeah. When you look at examples like this, and here the funny part is, white goes, all right, well, I hate e5 so much that I'm just going to sack the pawn back.
Yes,
It's just very very mature style of chess. Just going, okay, my opponent played a brilliant pawn sacrifice. Good job. You have a great strategic position, and you have great squares available. But I'm going to give the pawn back. I admit you played something brilliant. I missed, but I was
Black
playing.
is in an excellent position.
I was playing white here, so I have this tiny bit of a lead in development. I'll give the pawn back, and I'll try to I'll admit that I didn't play the best line. I'll try to hold things together, and just make sure I can try to maintain the position and keep the game going. So, yeah, I think that's a very practical approach. I hadn't heard you say that before, but yeah, I think that's a very good approach to playing black. Just being realistic, and just trying to understand the
White
positions.
might be in theory black, not necessarily, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's
you
fine.
do your best.
Yeah, you do your best. You get a reasonable position, and
You do your best. Like if you've gotten this far, it's already moved 20.
yeah, and
you'll
a
survive
lot of the
this
time, a lot of the time with black, I think pawn sacrifices can be quite startling for players to face. I mean, it's kind of like I mean, one of the examples I think that can surprise a lot of players is, of course, the Kasparov gambit. You know,
Right.
like the c4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, take. Was it this one? No, did I mix up the move order? Mix up the move order, take. Am I thinking of e5, knight b5? No, it's not here. It's not here. It's the other one. It's with knight f6, knight f6, d4. Sorry, it's take, and then e5
Yes.
with d5.
Yeah, it's very complicated opening, of course.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, it objectively, probably the true case of it is that black needs to be very accurate, but it's one of those cases where black scores very well in practice.
Right.
And part of it, I think, is that most of the players who would be playing this line with white are just kind of. It's a very good case of metagame theory, I think, just for good metagame play with black, because white is often trying to control the position when he's playing this kind of a line. And, in lines like e3, e4, I would say that the control of the position is quite loose. It's very hard, like here after rook to d8, black has a very good score here.
That's a good score.
Yeah, I mean, these positions are very hard to judge. But yeah, I mean, I've played a couple positions like this myself with black, and
Black already on the verge of equality, probably.
yeah, it looks like very good compensation. So
Please.
so lines like this, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to think deeply about a lot of things in chess that we just sort of take for granted.
Or, in the opposite example, are you in theory or not if you do d4, knight f6, knight f3, c5, d5, bishop g5.
Oops, sorry. C5,
c5,
D5.
d5, b5.
B5, bishop G5.
Bishop G5.
Sorry, let me just
theory
click on this.
with bishop to g5. Well, the only good move is d6. D6. As far as I know, is the only good move. Bishop takes f6. Pawn takes f6. And here e takes f6.
Oh, okay, wow.
And here, I believe the best move for white is something like c3 or e4. C3. Black's best move, or maybe e4. In fact, let's go e4. A6. A4. B takes a4.
Oh, you don't go B. Oh, you go B takes A4. So it's kind of like a Queen's Gambit accepted style.
Yeah. B takes A4. Or you could try B4, I guess, or B takes A4.
So
C3.
it's basically the unopposed bishop right here is
Yes,
very ineffective.
Is this theory or not? Or B4 is what you were suggesting.
Yeah.
B4 is the main line.
Mhm.
But here white is doing fairly okay with something to the effect knight to D2, or bishop D3 exactly, D6, knight D2, bishop G7, castles, knight C4, bishop to G4, H3, H3, bishop F3, queen takes F3, knight D7, A5, knight E5 probably. But black still has to be very careful to salvage this kind of a position, because white is all the breaks in this kind of a thing.
Yeah, no, interesting. No, that's a really interesting case, because I have seen some games in this position go downhill very quickly for black.
Right. So
And
black's not necessarily in theory, but still maybe
Yeah,
play.
no, I mean, I think it's one of those cases where black just needs to not go crazy. I mean, a lot of the time, I think I mostly seen games where black was playing, I want to say knight to e4.
But that's not a very good move.
It's not a very good move.
A4 or bishop h4, yes.
Yeah, it looks like white scores 75%.
75%.
Yeah,
of this
queen
kind
a5,
of
check,
thing.
knight bd2.
Right.
This looks very,
Poor.
very, very risky to play.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess that's also one of the things. I mean, one of the things that I was talking with Vossi Krajlic about is that he said a lot of people underestimate just how sturdy so many positions are if you can just hunker down, just play good solid chess. And so sometimes even when you're down a pawn, even with a bunch of pieces on the board, not just in a rook endgame, but sometimes with a bunch of pieces on the board, it's not going to be easy to convert it. And yeah, I think this is actually a pretty decent illustration of it. Just when you look at black solid play, you go, okay, you know, I mean, it kind of ties into what John Nunn said in Secrets of Practical Chess, that sometimes you'll get surprised by a line, you just won't be very familiar with it, and all right, you can just try to make it through the opening and look up the line later. And just come back the next game.
Right.
And the great thing about chess is that you can play 100 games in a year or 50 games in a year, and you'll get another second chance.
You'll play again.
You know, so you'll play again. You'll probably have the same line on the board again. So, yeah, you know, and I feel like d6 is a very hunkering down kind of move. You know, just nice and solid, and for whatever white has here, I mean, yeah, I think I can also
limited advantage, small edge,
limited,
probably.
yeah. So it's a case of I think good practical chess, kind of consistent with the sort of philosophy we've been talking about. Well, this has been really interesting. Yeah, I really like your overall philosophy for teaching chess and for approaching openings of the philosophy with black. I hadn't really thought about before, but yeah, makes a whole lot of sense to just be, you know, to be very very practical, to be pragmatic about all, you know, your goals in the opening, and thinking about kind of what your opponent's aims are, and you know, just your kind of intention of just trying to be comfortable with the positions you're playing, trying to have a plan, trying to, you know, just get more and more familiar, trying to learn the ins and outs of the things you're playing, and just gradually build up that knowledge base, and then eventually a lot of those moves will just kind of jump into your mind right away and just be kind of automatic moves. I mean, I think Geary was saying this, that when he looks at positions specifically early on in the game, he has 2 or 3 candidate moves instantly pop into his head. So yeah, I think that's kind of a good long-term goal. So yeah, sounds like very good philosophies. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Eric.